We live in a society that overconsumes on everything, from insane Shein and Sephora hauls to stocking our pantries with vast amounts of food that we can barely finish before it expires, to bathroom cabinets or garages that look like an entire store, and binging one show after the other for hours without end. Overconsumption is a real problem, and it also changes the way we view things. If we just take the example of fast fashion, overconsumption makes us value things less.
It's kind of like you buy it, but then you can also throw it away afterwards. It's not something that you know that you've got to keep. It's like an affordable fashion.
What? Just because the thing is cheap, we can be careless with it, throw it away if we don't like it anymore? Well, there are still resources behind it, and just to mention one cotton t-shirt used up about 2,700 liters or 713 gallons of water. That's how much one person drinks in about 2.5 years. And then there's also the factory workers behind it, who put their hard work, sweat, and talent into making this item while, most probably, being extremely underpaid. And we just take this item, wear it once, and then throw it out? We have a problem. As you can tell, this issue brings out many emotions in myself and maybe also in you, and rightfully so. If you're new to this channel, hi, my name is Rebecca, and thank you for joining me on uncovering more about this topic of overconsumption. A little side note here, this video is not meant to blame anyone for overconsuming. I also overconsumed in the past and I'm still not perfect. I'm still on my journey of trying to be more intentional with my purchases. But I think it's really important that we talk more about this problem so that we know the actual impacts it has. Let's move on. I have sectioned this video in 3 chapters. First, we'll take a look at the problem of overconsumption, then how it impacts us and keeps us poor, and in the final chapter, we'll look at how we can escape the rat race. Let's get started. Chapter 1, the problem with overconsumption. Let's start with taking a step back and looking at what types of overconsumption we're dealing with today, because it's not just what we might first think of, overconsumption of clothes that later get dumped somewhere in the desert. It's also the overconsumption of houses, for example. Over the past decades, the house sizes in the US have dramatically increased, and it seems to be normal to aspire to live in a large house one day. It's also overconsuming on social media. I found a website that publishes digital reports and I got a little carried away with looking at all of these statistics over the years. If you want to check it out, I'll link it in the description box. The most striking statistic to me was the average time spent using social media. At the moment, we're at 2.5 hours each day. If we're taking these 2.5 hours and multiply them by 30, we get 75 hours on social media per month. That's 4.5 full days if we subtract the 8 hours we're supposed to be sleeping. And we all know that we're very likely to spend much more time than that in front of a screen because that statistic does not take into account streaming or watching TV yet. And the problem with overconsuming social media is not only the hours upon hours wasted, but also that this is precisely where we get influenced to overconsume in other areas of our lives, like overconsuming beauty products, for example. I've made an entire video on that topic alone, so if you want to check it out, I'll link it here. But it's also influencing us to overconsume on micro trends or other trends. So we consume on things that are trendy in the moment, but that are maybe so eye-catching or special that after a couple of months, everyone is sick of seeing that same item again and again, so it comes out of style very quickly. That is wasted money. From the amount of insane shopping hauls that we see online, our view on quantity has become distorted. So we don't know anymore what a normal amount looks like or what responsible spending looks like. To keep up with the assumed standard of what amounts we should buy to make a shopping day a good shopping day, or what selection of items we should have at our home, we easily switch to fast fashion or other fast items just because it's more affordable, more available, and maybe ships faster. But if we buy from fast fashion websites like Shein, we sacrifice quality over price. Another type of overconsumption is constantly upgrading our phones, cars, and other gadgets, even though they're still working perfectly fine. I know items break after a while and need to be replaced, but I'm talking about always having to have the latest and the newest. In that case, we're overconsuming. There are so many different types of overconsumption, and the problem with overconsumption is that it leads to a culture of disposability, where we don't value the things we buy as much, and instead we view them as disposable, which in turn leads to a lot more waste, and we throw away things that are in perfectly good condition sometimes. By the way, why is it that we value things less if they're cheap?
If you walk into Primark, cheap, bargain, top floor. Cheap, bargain, it's on floor. Poundland, Poundworld, any bargain place, everything's on the floor. I think it's just because it's a bargain, they just don't care, just bang it on floor.
I believe part of the reason is the price itself, because it indicates that this item is not very valuable. But on the other hand, it's also because usually there's a surplus of cheap things. And if we're overflowing with things, then usually we see them as less valuable. The last problem with overconsumption I want to mention here is buyer's remorse, because overconsumption can easily lead to buyer's remorse. Instead of spending our money on a few hand-selected items that we really love, we buy many of them that we don't value as much, so that can lead to resenting making that purchase and spending that money. Let's do a little interlude. Why is it that we overconsume? We already touched on societal pressure and advertising that makes us want to buy more and more. It's easy to fall into the trap of wanting to keep up with someone or with what others have. And we also want to have a sense of novelty. We just want more and more in our consumeristic society, but ultimately that will not lead us to lasting satisfaction. Retail therapy. That term is a lot more common than it should be. What is it? Retail therapy is shopping with the primary purpose of improving the buyer's mood or disposition. And that is unfortunately true. We often go shopping because we're bored or because we want to combat negative feelings. So we're using shopping as a coping mechanism or as a distraction. And obviously most of the time it's subconscious, but if we did question ourselves and if we were honest with ourselves, we could uncover many unhealthy reasons for shopping. And fighting our negative feelings does work to an extent, because shopping can trigger the release of dopamine in our brains, and obviously we want to repeat what makes us feel good. Let's summarize. So we shop out of want or need, but oftentimes we also shop to keep up with someone or a certain image that we want to portray. We also shop to distract ourselves or as a coping mechanism. And especially these last ones make it easy to overconsume, because we're buying for the sake of buying and not out of need. If you like this video so far, then go ahead and hit the like button. This would really help me out. And let's move on to chapter 2. Overconsumption is keeping you poor. In most cases, overconsumption is equivalent to overspending, because there's not many things that we can consume that don't cost anything. Maybe social media. Overconsumption can have negative effects on our finances because it causes us to spend more money than we can actually afford, even if we then resort to cheaper alternatives. If we buy them in bulk, in large quantities, it's still easy to overspend. And with our automatic shopping habits, we might not even realize how much we're actually spending over a week, a month, or a year. So overconsumption can lead to financial difficulties or even ruin if we're not careful. The best example for this is overconsuming in houses. It's natural to want to live in a bigger or better home, but usually they come hand in hand with higher maintenance costs. Electricity is higher, water is higher, property taxes, everything is more expensive. There was a TV show named Extreme Makeover Home Edition that upgraded the houses of families in need. However, this interesting video essay from Study Break showed that the home renovations sometimes had a disastrous impact on the families.
She says she was able to afford the $30,000 mortgage, but over the years, property taxes tripled.
It just took, a few unexpected emergencies. I got behind.
The next thing she knew, an eviction notice came in the mail.
Now, these were just a few examples of the families that lost their new homes due to unexpected tax and financial consequences and increased monthly expenses, which set them back even further than where they were before Extreme Home Makeover even got themselves involved in these people's lives.
What can we learn from this? Well, we might be tempted to get this nice house or this nice apartment to rent that we can afford, but just barely afford. The problem is, if you're barely making ends meet with this new home, then you're just one financial emergency away from ruin. So don't overconsume and choose something that you can just barely afford. Choose something where you still have money left over at the end of the month or at the beginning of each month to put towards your emergency fund or other unexpected expenses each month. Talking about money, when we overconsume, we are disrespecting our time and effort. We work so hard to make our money, and then we let people from TikTok make us buy 10 items that we don't really need. This is a disrespect of our time. We're throwing our money out the window. We are disrespecting how much effort we put into making this money in the first place. If you want to dive deeper into the topic of true cost of things, then I recommend this video next. And I'm not talking about never buying new things again or not being able to enjoy your hard-earned money, but I'm talking about buying unnecessary things like unproportionate hauls of clothes, overconsumption of media, whether it's binge-watching Netflix for hours each day or mindlessly scrolling through social media each day, will not necessarily keep you poor financially, but definitely in relationships and experiences. Additionally, if we always spend all our money on material items, on shopping more and more, we won't have money for other things like exploring a new country or going to the concert you've always wanted to go to. More material things mean less experiences. Overconsumption is not only keeping you poor, but also the factory workers of fast fashion or other fast items. If things are super cheap, then the owners of that business only have a very tight margin, which means they have to sell in large quantities and also very fast to make a profit. For workers, that comes hand in hand with more stress. And since the production costs are to be kept at a minimum, we all know the factory workers are extremely underpaid and have poor quality of life. Last but not least, overconsumption is keeping our environment poor, and that will lead to us not being able to enjoy nature as much. We usually have much more than what we need of any category of the things we own, but if we just talk about clothes for a moment, we barely wear them until they fall apart. That means we're spending money on things that we wouldn't have needed to buy and that we end up throwing away after a while. This is harmful for the environment and for the climate. When we throw away things that are still in good conditions, we're basically saying and accepting that the resources needed to produce and ship this item were in vain. It makes me so mad that there are 7,000 to 30,000 tons of clothes that end up in the deserts of Chile each year. And unfortunately, these are not just clothes that we throw away. Some of them are overproductions from clothing companies, and some are from thrift stores that just can't deal with the masses of clothes they get. So if you think donating your used clothes is a climate-saving solution, the truth is 84% of them end up in landfills or incinerators. The best alternative is still to only buy what you truly need and what you will love for years. There's so much more that we could discuss on overconsumption, but let me share one final thought with you before we move on to the section of what we can do. Here's my thought. One Starbucks coffee does not make you poor, but if you overconsume and if you buy one every single day, it will have an impact on your finances. Yes, choosing a more affordable apartment instead of an expensive one, that decision will have a much bigger impact on your finances. But in my opinion, every time we overconsume instead of consuming in moderation, we should question ourselves and our motives. Why is it that we overconsume? Are we trying to impress others, or do we care too much about what other people think? Or is it a coping mechanism for an issue we should address? Questioning why you overconsume will help you escape the cycle. Chapter 3. Escaping the rat race. So what can we do? Analyze your shopping habits and try to find out how much of the stuff you're buying you end up throwing away or giving away after a while. And then try to be more mindful with future purchases. It's really helpful to have a wish list with the items you really want to have to avoid impulse purchases. Buy things that you're truly excited about and that you will still love in 5 to 10 years. You can also explore a more minimalist lifestyle. Remember, you don't need a certain item or amounts of items to be valuable. And nobody pays attention whether you repeat an outfit or not. And if they do, dump them. You can find better friends than that. To me personally, I love seeing my friends wear the same sweater or the same outfit over and over again, because it means that they have found their thing, they have found their style and something that they really love. Consider taking a break from social media if it's influencing you to overconsume. And in order to combat shopping as a coping mechanism, try to set up a new healthy habit in place. So next time you want to go shopping or online shopping because you feel anxious, go for a run instead. This is one proven way to reduce anxiety or stress. Repair and reuse what you already have, swap with friends, and look for secondhand alternatives. That should be the default. Let's make this the first approach when we need or want something new. And when we have exhausted these options, then let's go ahead and look where we can buy that thing for new. If you can afford it, try to switch to more eco-friendly alternatives. Support businesses that truly try to minimize the impact they have on the environment. And you might find that if you weren't able to afford that earlier, if you're now buying only 2 very well thought of items instead of 10, you might be able to afford it. And on the topic of not being able to afford it, as students and low-income households, we usually use the excuse, well, I can't afford these expensive brands. Yes, I understand, I've been there. However, I'm talking about overconsumption. So if you can only afford H&M and you buy a handful of items that you love and you wear until they fall apart, that is something completely different than making a huge haul of new items and getting rid of half of them still in good condition because you don't wear them anymore. Quantity is decisive. And I know that for some of us, the problem lies even deeper. If we grew up without having much and with always wearing clothes that were out of style or not as cool as the ones of our classmates, we might try to overcompensate now. Now we do have the money, now we can buy nice things, and now we can have cute clothes and a variety of things. In that case, question your motives. When consumption comes from a place of fear because we have experienced scarcity in the past, we really need to investigate that further. To finish off this video, let me share some questions you can ask yourself before your next purchase if you struggle with overconsumption. First off, am I buying this to keep up with someone or to fit in? Am I shopping as a form of coping mechanism or distraction? Am I currently feeling anxious, stressed, or bored and that's why I want to shop now? Am I shopping to combat the fear of not having enough or running out of something? Do I truly love this item and do I see myself using it in 5 years from now? And lastly, will this purchase put me closer or further away from where I want to be? That's all I have for you today on overconsumption, but let's keep the discussion going in the comments down below. By the way, if you're wondering what my channel is about, I help you simplify your finances, manage your money better, and help you live a more intentional and focused life. So if these are things that are interesting to you, then follow along, hit the subscribe button, have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in my next video.